The hospital room smelled like bleach and broken dreams. I could barely keep my eyes open, but the stack of papers in David's trembling hands made my heart pound harder than it should have, considering I was supposed to be dying. Katherine, I need to tell you something before... His voice cracked. 23 years of marriage, and I'd never seen my husband cry like this. Before I die? I whispered, managing a bitter laugh that turned into a coughing fit. What could possibly be worse than pancreatic cancer, David? He set the papers on my bedside table, and I caught a glimpse of official letterhead. DNA test results. My blood turned to ice water. It's about Danny, our son, my beautiful boy who just turned 16 last month, the child I'd carried for 9 months, loved for 16 years, sacrificed everything for. The reason I'd given up my career as a forensic accountant to be a stay-at-home mother. What about Danny? But even as I asked, something deep in my gut already knew. The way David wouldn't meet my eyes. The way he'd been acting strange ever since Danny's birthday party 3 weeks ago. Katherine, I'm so sorry. I never meant for you to find out like this, especially not now. But the doctors said you only have days left, and I couldn't let you die without knowing the truth. David, my voice came out sharper than I intended. What about Danny? He picked up the papers with shaking hands. When Danny needed that emergency surgery last month for his appendix, they ran some routine blood work. The hospital called me about irregularities. They suggested genetic testing because something didn't match up with our medical history. The room started spinning. Get to the point. He's not your son, Katherine. Biologically, I mean. He's mine, but he's not yours. The heart monitor started beeping faster. I stared at my husband of 23 years, this man I'd trusted with everything, and felt my world collapse completely. How? The word barely came out. David's face crumpled. Do you remember when you had that terrible miscarriage 16.5 years ago? You were so devastated, so broken. You were in the hospital for 3 days because of the complications, and you could barely function for weeks after. I remembered. God, I remembered. The worst pain of my life, losing our first baby at 5 months. I'd been inconsolable. What did you do, David? There was this woman, Eleanor. I met her at that business conference in Chicago right after your miscarriage. I was drinking too much. I was grieving too, and it was one night, Katherine. Just one terrible night, and she got pregnant. My vision blurred. You cheated on me while I was grieving our dead baby. I am so sorry. I was going to tell you, but then Eleanor called me 2 months later. She said she didn't want the baby, that she was too young, too career-focused. She was only 22. She begged me to take him when he was born. The pieces were falling into place like shards of glass cutting through my chest. You brought me another woman's baby and told me he was mine. You were so depressed, Katherine. The doctors were worried about you. You weren't eating, you weren't sleeping. When I brought Danny home and told you the hospital had made a mistake, that somehow the baby had survived and they kept him in the NICU all those months, you lit up. You came back to life. I came back to life raising your mistress's child? I screamed, which triggered another coughing fit. The taste of blood filled my mouth. She wasn't my mistress. It was one night, one horrible mistake. Don't. I grabbed the bed rail, pulling myself up despite the pain shooting through my abdomen. Don't you dare minimize this. You let me believe for 16 years that Danny was my biological son. You watched me love him, sacrifice for him, build my entire identity around being his mother. And he's not even mine. David was sobbing now. But you are his mother, Katherine. Biology doesn't matter. You raised him. You loved him. Where is she? My voice came out like a roar despite my weakness. Where is this Eleanor woman? David's face went white. "Katherine, please don't." "Where is she, David?" He looked down at his hands. She's been in Danny's life. Not obviously, but she's been around." The room tilted. "What do you mean, around?" "She's the volunteer art teacher at his high school. She started there when Danny was in middle school. She wanted to watch him grow up from a distance. Mrs. Rodriguez. The beautiful, young art teacher that Danny always talked about. The woman who'd been coming to our house for parent conferences, school events, graduation planning. The woman who'd hugged me at Danny's birthday party 3 weeks ago and told me what a wonderful job I'd done raising him. She'd been watching me raise her son for years, smiling at me, taking credit for his artistic talents, probably laughing behind my back about the stupid woman who didn't know she was raising another woman's child. How long have you been in contact with her?" "Katherine, please, you're getting too worked up. The doctor said..." "How long?" "Since Danny was 10. She reached out, said she wanted to be part of his life somehow. I couldn't say no. He's her son too." I felt something break inside of my chest, and it wasn't the cancer. "You've been letting his real mother play house with my family for 6 years, and I never knew." "She made me promise never to tell you. She said it would destroy you, and Danny was so happy. I thought it was better this way." "Better?" I laughed, and blood spattered onto the white hospital sheets. "You thought it was better to let me live a lie for 16 years, to let me pour every ounce of love I had into a child who belongs to another woman, to let her watch me be a mother to her son while she got to be the fun art teacher who swoops in for the good parts." The heart monitor was screaming now. Nurses were rushing in, but I didn't care. I was dying anyway. "Does Danny know?" I whispered as they tried to calm me down. David shook his head. "No. Elena and I agreed he was too young. We were going to tell him when he turned 18. After I was dead and couldn't interfere." David's silence was answer enough. As the nurses injected something into my IV and the world started going fuzzy, I stared at my husband with perfect clarity for the first time in 23 years. "You stole my life," I whispered. "You stole 16 years of my life and gave them to her." Those were the last words I spoke before the medication pulled me under. I woke up to the sound of my alarm clock playing that annoying pop song from 2009. The same song that had driven me crazy when... "Wait!" I shot up in bed, my heart racing, expecting the crushing pain in my abdomen, the tubes, the smell of antiseptic. Instead, I felt perfect, strong, healthy. I looked around frantically. This wasn't the hospital room. This was my bedroom. But not the master bedroom David and I shared in 2024. This was our old bedroom, the smaller one we'd had in our first house. The house we'd sold in 2010. I stumbled to the mirror, and the face looking back at me was my own, but 15 years younger. 38 instead of 53. No grey hair, no lines etched by years of unknowing betrayal, no hollow cheeks from months of chemotherapy. My hands were shaking as I grabbed my phone from the nightstand. The date on the screen made my legs give out. March 15th, 2009. Danny's first birthday was in 2 months. He was still a baby, still innocent, still mine, even though I now knew the devastating truth. And Eleanor Rodriguez didn't even know David existed yet. That business conference where they'd meet wasn't until next month. I had been given the most impossible gift imaginable, a second chance. 15 years to rewrite everything. 15 years to make sure that this time the people who destroyed my life would be the ones left with nothing. I smiled for the first time since waking up in that hospital room, and it felt dangerous. David was still asleep next to me, probably dreaming about his upcoming business trip to Chicago. The trip where he'd meet his future mistress and create the son that would steal my identity as a mother. Not this time. This time I was going to destroy them all. The first thing I did was cancel David's Chicago business trip. What do you mean you're not going? David looked up from his laptop, confused. He was sitting at our little kitchen table, completely oblivious that his wife had just returned from the dead with a mission for vengeance. I said, I'm not comfortable with you travelling right now. Danny's been fussy lately, and I need you here. I bounced my baby son on my hip, studying his tiny face with new eyes. He looked nothing like me. How had I never noticed? The dark hair that matched David's, but the delicate features that must have come from her. Katherine, this conference is important for the firm. Peterson specifically asked me to represent the company. I set Danny in his high chair and turned to face my husband fully. Then, Peterson can send someone else. You're needed here. David's jaw tightened. Since when do you dictate my work schedule? Since I found out you're planning to cheat on me in 3 weeks and destroy our entire family, I thought. Out loud, I said, since I'm your wife and the mother of your child, and I'm asking you not to go. The guilt that flashed across his face was almost amusing. If only he knew that in my original timeline, I'd practically pushed him out the door for that trip, telling him it would be good for his career. I'd even packed his suitcase. Fine, he muttered. I'll tell Peterson I can't make it. Victory number 1. But I knew that simply preventing the initial meeting wouldn't be enough. David was weak, and Eleanor Rodriguez was probably already working as a substitute teacher somewhere in the city. They would find each other eventually, especially since fate seemed determined to bring them together in my first life. I needed to understand exactly who I was dealing with. After David left for work, I strapped Danny into his car seat and drove to the public library. The reference librarian? Mrs. Chen? No, wait, I couldn't use that name anymore. The reference librarian, Mrs. Williams, raised an eyebrow when I asked to use their computer research station with a baby in tow. Research project, I explained with a sweet smile. I'm a forensic accountant working on a case from home. That much was still true. I hadn't given up my career yet in 2009. That sacrifice would come later, when Danny started walking and I convinced myself he needed me home full-time. Another decision I would be making differently this time around. Elena Rodriguez was surprisingly easy to research. Social media was just beginning to explode in 2009, and young people documented everything. I found her Facebook profile within minutes. 22 years old, just like David had said. Gorgeous in that effortless way that made older women like me feel frumpy. She was a recent art education graduate from Northwestern, currently working as a substitute teacher in the Chicago public school system while looking for a permanent position. Her relationship status said single, and her posts were full of complaints about student loans and excitement about her bright future in education. She wanted to inspire young minds through creativity and make a difference in children's lives. The irony made me physically sick. She would definitely make a difference in a child's life. She'd steal him from his mother. I scrolled through her photos, looking for any sign that she might know David. Nothing. They truly hadn't met yet in this timeline. But as I dug deeper, I found something interesting. Elena had been applying to schools all over the Midwest, including several in our district. In fact, she'd been particularly interested in Lincoln Elementary, where Danny would eventually go to kindergarten. Even without meeting David, she was already gravitating toward our community. This felt bigger than coincidence. I printed out everything I could find about her, then started researching David's company conference schedule. The Chicago trip might be cancelled, but there would be others. I needed to know every possible way their paths might cross. Mama? Danny babbled from his stroller, reaching for the papers in my hand. Not for you, baby, I murmured, quickly shuffling Eleanor's photos away from his curious fingers. The strangest part was how much I still loved him. I'd expected the knowledge of his true parentage to change my feelings, but it didn't. He was still the child I'd raised, still innocent in all this. The betrayal was David's and Eleanor's, not his. But that didn't mean I was going to let them have him. By the time I got home, I had a plan forming. David might not be going to Chicago this month, but Elena Rodriguez was still out there, still looking for teaching jobs, still destined to disrupt my family. I needed to neutralize the threat before it could manifest. I spent Danny's nap time on the phone. Lincoln Elementary? Hi, this is Katherine Mitchell. My husband David works with the school district's budget committee, and I'm calling about your substitute teacher hiring practices. Lies came so easily when you had a righteous cause. I've heard wonderful things about a young teacher named Elena Rodriguez, and I wanted to put in a good word for her. I understand she's been applying to schools in our district. The secretary was chatty and helpful. Yes, they had received Elena's application. Yes, she seemed very qualified. Yes, they were always looking for good substitute teachers, especially in the arts. Actually, the secretary confided, we just had an opening come up for a permanent art position at Roosevelt Middle School. I was going to call her tomorrow. Roosevelt Middle School, where Danny would be a student in 6 years. Oh, how exciting for her, I said sweetly. You know what? I'd love to recommend someone else for that position. A friend of mine, Jessica Park, just moved here from California with 15 years of experience. Would it be possible to give her a call first? Jessica Park didn't exist, but I'd worry about that later. Well, I suppose we should consider all qualified candidates. Wonderful. I'll have Jessica call you this afternoon with her credentials. I hung up and immediately started crafting a fake resume for my fictional friend Jessica. If Elena couldn't get permanent positions in our district, she'd have to look elsewhere. Maybe she'd move to a different state entirely. But as I worked, something nagged at me. Elena had been so specific about wanting to work in education, so passionate about inspiring young minds. What if teaching wasn't just her career choice? What if it was her way of preparing to be a part of Danny's life? What if she somehow knew he was her son already? The thought made my hands freeze over the keyboard. David had said Eleanor reached out when Danny was 10, claiming she wanted to be a part of his life. But what if she'd been planning it all along? What if the whole thing, the conference, the one-night stand, even giving up her baby, had been some elaborate long-term strategy? I thought about Eleanor's Facebook posts again, her comments about making a difference in children's lives, her interest in our specific school district, the way she'd eventually manoeuvred herself into Danny's daily life as his beloved art teacher. David was weak and stupid, but Eleanor might be calculating. I picked up Danny when he started crying, holding him close as pieces of a darker puzzle began forming in my mind. What if this was never an accident? I whispered to him. What if she planned all of this from the beginning? If that were true, then simply preventing David's Chicago trip wouldn't be enough. Elena would find another way to get to him, another way to infiltrate our family. She might even approach him directly. I needed more information, and I needed it fast. That evening, I waited until David was in the shower, then went through his phone. Nothing suspicious yet, but I installed tracking software anyway. If Elena tried to contact him through any other means, I'd know about it. Next, I hacked into his work email. The computer skills I developed as a forensic accountant were finally going to serve a personal purpose. What I found in his deleted items folder made my blood run cold. An email from 3 days ago, from Elena Rodriguez. Mr. Mitchell, I hope you don't mind me reaching out directly. I got your contact information from the Northwestern Alumni Directory. I'm a recent graduate looking for opportunities in the Chicago business community, and I noticed your firm does educational consulting. I was wondering if you might have time for a brief informational interview. I'd be happy to meet at your convenience. Best regards, Elena Rodriguez. She'd already made contact. The conference had just been a backup plan. I stared at the screen, fury building in my chest. David hadn't responded yet. The email was still sitting in his deleted items, which meant he'd read it and deleted it but hadn't replied. Yet. But I knew he would. In my original timeline, David had been susceptible to flattery from beautiful young women. He'd respond to Eleanor's email, they'd meet for that informational interview, and history would repeat itself. Unless I got to her first. I smiled grimly as I forwarded Elena's email to my own account, then permanently deleted it from David's trash folder. Time to pay my future son's real mother a visit. I found Elena Rodriguez at a trendy coffee shop in Lincoln Park, grading papers with red ink staining her fingers. She looked exactly like her Facebook photos, young, beautiful, and completely unaware that her future victim was watching her from across the room. I'd left Danny with my mother, telling her I had an urgent work meeting. In a way, that was true. This was the most important work I'd ever do. Elena Rodriguez? I approached her table with a friendly smile, carrying my own coffee and a manila folder. I'm Katherine Mitchell. I believe you sent my husband an email about an informational interview? Her face lit up with recognition. Oh, Mrs. Mitchell, yes. I'm so sorry to bother him at work. I hope I wasn't being too forward. Not at all. David mentioned you're looking for opportunities in education consulting. I slid into the chair across from her uninvited. I actually work in forensic accounting, and we do a lot of work with educational institutions. I thought I might be able to help. The lie rolled off my tongue effortlessly. Eleanor's eyes sparkled with interest and something else. Calculation. She was sizing me up, trying to figure out how I could be useful to her. That's so generous of you. I have to admit, I'm really passionate about finding ways to impact children's lives. Sometimes the traditional classroom just isn't enough, you know? Oh, I completely understand. I have a baby myself, just turned 1. The desire to shape young minds is so admirable. I watched her face carefully. What age group are you most interested in working with? Elementary and middle school, definitely. There's something so special about children in that age range. They're still so moldable. The way she said it made my skin crawl. Actually, I've been specifically looking at schools in your district. I just love the community feel of your area. How interesting. What drew you to our specific district? Elena's smile faltered for just a second. Oh, I did some research. Good schools, family-oriented neighbourhoods, the kind of place where you could really build relationships with families, watch children grow up, like she'd watched Danny grow up from a distance after abandoning him as a baby. Speaking of building relationships, I said, opening my folder, I've actually been doing some research myself. About you. Her coffee cup stopped halfway to her lips. I'm sorry. Elena Rodriguez, born 1987 in Cleveland. Parents divorced when you were 12. Mother remarried a wealthy businessman when you were 16. Graduated Northwestern with honours but took out significant student loans despite your stepfather's wealth. I pulled out the first document. Her college transcripts, which I'd obtained through channels I probably shouldn't have had access to. Very impressive grades, especially in child psychology. Why would you... She was stammering now, her composure cracking. Because I'm very good at my job, Eleanor, and my job is finding patterns, uncovering deceptions, following money trails. I leaned forward. Want to know what pattern I found when I looked into your background? She shook her head, but I continued anyway. You've been researching my husband for months. Not just his professional background, his personal life, his family, his schedule, his weaknesses. I pulled out printed screenshots of her internet searches, obtained through methods David's company security team had taught me years ago. David Mitchell, family photos. David Mitchell, wife occupation. David Mitchell, home address. David Mitchell, recent conference attendance. Eleanor's face went white. I don't know what you're talking about. You targeted him, Eleanor. This wasn't some random alumni outreach. You studied him, learned he was married to a forensic accountant who worked from home, discovered he had a baby son, and then you crafted that perfect little email designed to appeal to his ego. You're crazy. But her voice was shaking. Am I? Because here's what I think happened. I think you realised that a wealthy, established businessman with a new baby might be feeling overwhelmed and vulnerable. I think you figured out that his wife, that would be me, is focused on their child and might not be paying enough attention to her husband's emotional needs. I think you saw an opportunity. Elena stood up abruptly. I don't have to listen to this. Sit down. My voice came out cold and commanding, nothing like the friendly tone I'd used earlier. We're not finished. Something in my expression must have frightened her because she sat back down. Here's what's going to happen, I said quietly. You're going to delete David's contact information. You're going to withdraw your applications from every school district within a 50-mile radius of our home. You're going to find a nice teaching job somewhere far away, California maybe, or Florida, and you're going to disappear from our lives permanently. Or what? Eleanor's fear was shifting back to defiance. You'll tell your husband that some young teacher tried to network with him? He'll probably think you're having a mental breakdown. I smiled and she flinched. Or I'll destroy you. I pulled out the rest of my folder's contents. Eleanor, sweetheart, you made one crucial mistake when you decided to target my family. You assumed I was just some suburban housewife who wouldn't fight back. But I'm a forensic accountant who specialises in white-collar crime, and I have resources you can't imagine. I spread the documents across the table like tarot cards. Your student loan applications contained 3 significant false statements about your financial status. That's federal fraud. Your substitute teaching certifications were obtained using a fake address in Chicago when you were actually living with your boyfriend in Evanston. That's misrepresentation. And this email you sent to my husband? You used Northwestern University's alumni directory for personal gain, which violates their terms of service and could get you blacklisted from their network permanently. Elena stared at the papers, her breathing shallow. But wait, there's more. I leaned back in my chair. I also found your sealed juvenile record. Shoplifting at 16, charges dropped because Mummy's new husband had connections. Plagiarism accusation in your senior year of college, swept under the rug by a professor you were sleeping with. And my personal favourite, the restraining order filed against you by your ex-boyfriend last year for harassment and stalking. He was lying. Was he? Because the pattern I see is of a young woman who takes what she wants without regard for consequences, who manipulates older men to get ahead, and who doesn't understand the word no. I gathered the papers back into the folder. The question is, do you want to add ruining a family to that list? Eleanor's hands were trembling. What do you want from me? I told you, disappear, find a job in another state, build your career somewhere else, and stay away from my husband and my family. And if I don't? Then I'll make sure every school district in the country knows exactly who Elena Rodriguez really is. I'll send copies of your juvenile record, your plagiarism file, and your restraining order to every potential employer. I'll make sure the Illinois State Board of Education knows about your falsified applications, and I'll personally ensure that you never work in education again. The coffee shop suddenly felt very quiet. Elena was staring at me like she'd never seen anything like me before. You can't do this, she whispered. I just did. I stood up, slinging my purse over my shoulder. You have 48 hours to withdraw your applications and leave the state. If I see you anywhere near my family after that, if you so much as drive through our town, I'll rain down hell on your life, that will make your stalking ex-boyfriend look like a minor inconvenience? I started to walk away, then turned back. Oh, and Eleanor, next time you want to destroy someone's marriage and steal their child, maybe don't target a woman whose job is catching people exactly like you. I left her sitting there, surrounded by her graded papers and her shattered plans, probably wondering how a simple informational interview had turned into the worst day of her life. But as I walked back to my car, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was too easy. Elena had folded too quickly, looked too defeated. In my experience, people who made careers out of manipulation didn't give up after one confrontation. I had a feeling this war was just beginning, but at least now she knew exactly who she was fighting. I was right to be suspicious. Elena Rodriguez was far more dangerous than I'd anticipated. 3 days after our coffee shop confrontation, I found David's laptop open on the kitchen counter with a video call still running. The screen showed Elena, tears streaming down her face, speaking directly to my husband while I was supposedly out grocery shopping. David, I'm so sorry to bother you like this, but your wife is completely unhinged. She's been stalking me, threatening me, making up lies about my past. I'm actually scared for my safety. I ducked behind the kitchen doorway, listening as David's voice came through the speakers, confused and concerned. Katherine did what? Elena, slow down. What exactly did she say to you? She had all these fake documents, claiming I was some kind of criminal. She said terrible things about wanting to destroy me, and she knew personal details about my life that no one should know. David, I think she might be having some kind of mental breakdown. Clever girl. She was turning my truth-telling into evidence of my instability. I just wanted to network professionally, Eleanor continued. And now your wife is acting like I'm some kind of threat to your family. All I did was send you an email asking for career advice. I watched David's face on the screen, saw the doubt creeping into his expression. In my original timeline, he'd always been susceptible to beautiful women in distress. Eleanor, I'm sure Katherine didn't mean to... David, I need to ask you something, and please be honest. Has your wife been acting strangely lately? Paranoid? Suspicious? Because the things she said to me, they weren't rational. My blood turned to ice. She was trying to convince David that I was mentally ill. If she succeeded, she could have me committed, get me out of the way permanently, and then console my poor, overwhelmed husband through his wife's tragic breakdown. It was brilliant, and it almost worked. You know what? David said slowly. Katherine has been acting differently. She cancelled my Chicago trip for no real reason. She's been asking strange questions about work, and yesterday I caught her going through my phone. Oh, David. Eleanor's voice was soft with full sympathy. I'm so sorry. This must be so hard for you, especially with a baby to take care of. She's usually so logical, so reasonable, but lately, I'd heard enough. I walked into the kitchen with my grocery bags, making sure to slam the door loudly. David, who are you talking to? His face flushed guilty red. Katherine, you're home early. I can see that. I set the bags down and looked directly at the screen. Hello, Eleanor, still trying to insert yourself into my family. I see. Eleanor's tear-stained face hardened for just a moment before she forced another sob. David, you see? This is exactly what I was talking about. The hostility? The paranoia? Paranoia, I laughed, pulling my phone from my purse. David, darling, would you like to know what Elena has really been doing for the past 3 days? I'd been monitoring her movements since our coffee meeting, using the same investigation techniques that made me excellent at my job. The pictures on my phone told a complete story. This is Eleanor yesterday, parked outside Danny's daycare for 2 hours. I showed David the first photo. This is her at your office building, talking to the security guard about getting visitor access to surprise you. And this, I swiped to the final image, is Eleanor at the courthouse this morning, filing papers to have me declared mentally incompetent. The silence on the video call was deafening. "Eleanor?" David's voice was deadly quiet. "Is this true?" "David, I can explain. You were watching my son. You tried to get into my office. You filed legal papers against my wife." Eleanor's mask finally slipped completely. The tears stopped, the helpless victim act disappeared, and I saw the calculating predator underneath. "Your son?" she sneered. "David, you have no idea what you're talking about. That child is..." "Is what, Eleanor?" I interrupted, stepping closer to the laptop screen. "Go ahead. Tell my husband what you were really going to say." She caught herself just in time, but the damage was done. David was staring at the screen with growing horror. "Katherine," he said slowly, "how did you know to be watching her? How did you know she was going to do any of this?" This was the moment I'd been dreading and anticipating for days. Time for the truth, or at least a version of it that wouldn't land me in a psychiatric facility. Because 15 years ago, Elena Rodriguez destroyed our family. She stole our lives. She manipulated you, and she took everything that mattered to me. And when I woke up 3 days ago with the chance to stop it from happening, I decided I wasn't going to be a victim twice. David's face went pale. "Katherine, what are you talking about? 15 years ago? David?" I sat down at that kitchen table, looking directly at him through the screen. "What if I told you that in another timeline, another life, you cheated on me with Elena Rodriguez? What if I told you that she convinced you to bring me a baby that wasn't mine, and let me raise him for 16 years before I found out the truth on my deathbed?" "I would say you're having a breakdown," he whispered. "Would you?" I pulled out the folder I'd prepared for this moment. "Even if I could prove that Elena has been researching you for months, even if I showed you documented evidence of her pattern of targeting married men, even if I told you exactly what she was going to say next." I looked directly at the laptop screen. "Eleanor, tell my husband about the baby you gave up for adoption 18 months ago. Tell him about the private investigator you hired to track down the father. Tell him about your plan to seduce him, get pregnant again, and then force him to choose between his old family and his new one." Elena's face went completely white. "Tell him about the trust fund your stepfather set up that you can only access if you're married and have children. Tell him how you need a husband and a baby to claim your inheritance, and how you figured a guilty, cheating husband would be easier to control than an honest one." "That's not... I never..." "Tell him, Eleanor, or I will." The silence stretched on forever. Finally, Eleanor spoke, and her voice was completely different. Cold, businesslike, stripped of all pretense. "Fine, yes, I researched him. Yes, I targeted him specifically, but not for the reasons you think." David looked like he was going to be sick. "Eleanor, what is she talking about?" "I had a baby 18 months ago," Eleanor said flatly. "I gave him up for adoption because I couldn't keep him. But I found out recently that I can't have any more children. Medical complications from the birth. So if I want to inherit my stepfather's estate, $20 million, David, I need that specific baby back." The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. "And the only way to get him back," I continued, "was to seduce his adoptive father, destroy his marriage, and then present yourself as the better option. The baby's real mother who could offer him a complete family and financial security." Eleanor's smile was razor sharp. "Very good, Katherine. You're smarter than I gave you credit for." David was staring at both of us like we were speaking a foreign language. "What baby? What adoption? Eleanor, I don't have any adopted children." I turned to my husband with perfect calm. "No, David, but in my original timeline, you would have. In 3 weeks, you would have cheated on Eleanor at that Chicago conference. She would have gotten pregnant, given birth to a son, and then given him to you when I was too devastated by my miscarriage to ask questions. Katherine, you're scaring me. And then, 6 years later, Eleanor would have come back. She'd have gotten a job at Danny's school, inserted herself into our lives, and slowly convinced you that I was an unfit mother. She'd have taken my son, my husband, and my life. And I would have died, never knowing that the child I'd loved for 16 years wasn't even mine. I stood up, walking over to where Danny was playing in his bouncy chair, completely oblivious to the drama surrounding him. But that's not going to happen this time, because Eleanor made one crucial mistake. What mistake? Eleanor hissed. I picked up Danny, holding him close, and smiled at the laptop screen. You assumed I would be the same naive, trusting woman I was 15 years ago. You thought you could manipulate David and get rid of me the same way you did before. But I've been where you're trying to take me, Elena. I've lived through the destruction you cause, and I will burn the entire world down before I let you do it again. I reached over and slammed the laptop shut, ending the call. David stared at me in stunned silence. Katherine, I need you to explain what just happened. All of it. I looked at my husband, really looked at him, and realised that in this timeline he was still the man I'd fallen in love with. He hadn't cheated yet, hadn't lied to me for 16 years, hadn't chosen another woman over me. He was confused and frightened, but he was still mine. David, I said softly, do you trust me? Yes, I think so. But, Katherine, some of the things you said, I know how they sounded, but everything I told you about Elena is true. She's been planning to destroy our family to get her hands on a $20 million inheritance. The only question is whether you believe me enough to help me stop her. He was quiet for a long time, looking between me and Danny. Finally, he spoke. What do you need me to do? 6 months later, Eleanor Rodriguez was arrested for fraud, identity theft, and attempted kidnapping after she tried to break into our house to steal Danny. The trust fund investigation I'd triggered revealed that she'd been running the same scam on multiple families across the Midwest, always targeting fathers of young children who matched her abandoned baby's profile. David never went to that Chicago conference. We never had the miscarriage that would have made me vulnerable to Elena's manipulation. And Danny grew up knowing exactly who his parents were, the people who had loved him from the moment he was born. As I watched my son take his first steps in our backyard, David's arms ready to catch him, I smiled. This time, I had won completely, and Elena Rodriguez would never destroy another family again.